Okay, so I always like to go over the tools first that we're going to need for this video. A small pick. We need 2 screwdrivers, 2 flathead screwdrivers, medium size and a small size. We're also going to need some sockets. So you have your 3/8, your 5/16, and your 1/4 inch. And then you need 2 Allen keys, a 5/64 and a 3/32. So that's all the tools you need to take an aseptic 6 apart. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start by removing the plate that holds the nozzle carrier on. Plate easily removes. Set that to the side. Now I can actually lift the carrier off. There's my outer bearing. I'll remove my nozzles because you always want to take your nozzles off. There are O-rings that get replaced on those nozzles, and you can also check them to make sure there's no debris inside. This is where the flat jaw pliers come into play. You don't want to scar up the surfaces of your nozzles, so we use flat jaw. All right, so if I flip this over, you can see that removed the bevel gear that sits on the back of the carrier and the inner bearing. So you have the inner bearing and the outer bearing. They are 2 different parts. All right, so next step, I always like to take the collar off. So this is where I'm going to need my 5/16 socket. I'm going to remove this nut. There is a O-ring underneath there and a set screw. That's going to allow you to take the top off. There's my collar. There is a gasket on top of the stator and a lower gasket. When you put the collar on, the collar pinches these gaskets so that it seals the area. There are 2 O-rings, a smaller one and a larger one, that sit right on top of the inlet piece here. Now I can remove the stator. So next step is I always like to flip the unit over, and this is where I got to change my socket. So I'm going to switch to the 3/8. Going to remove these 2 acorn nuts on the bottom. Once you loosen them, you can just use the socket to bring them up. All right, so there's one. There is a small gasket that sits on that screw. Put that to the side. Bring this one up. There's my little gasket again. Now I can release the bottom of the machine. Another one of those small gaskets. The other one is sitting down in the groove where it belongs. I can get that in a minute. This is a spacer that's real important. That always needs to go back on. So now I'm looking down on the output pinion and the 2 idler gears. So the next step is to take this acorn nut off. Again, that's going to be the 5/16 socket. Remove that acorn nut. There is a small O-ring that seals off the threads. That's where the pick comes in. Just need to put your pick in there and remove the O-ring. Sometimes it'll slide on you. All right. So I got my lower gasket and my O-ring at the same time. We'll set that to the side over here. All right, so very easily now I can pull up the idler shafts and the idler gears. They lift right out of the machine. Idler shaft, idler gears. And then the center output pinion will just pull right out of the machine. Sometimes it'll stick a little bit, so what you can do is just take 2 screwdrivers and just bump it a little bit, and that'll pop right up. And this is the ring gear. It simply just slides right out of the machine. All right, so the next step is I have to remove these 4 screws. This is where you need that medium-sized screwdriver, and you need to make sure the head doesn't scrape the outsides of the holes. It needs to be small enough to where it gets right on top of the screw. So I have 4 of these to remove. This is the last one, and I will show you each screw does have a little O-ring that sits on top of it there. Again, that seals off the threads. Now the entire T-housing will just lift off the machine. Flip this over. So there's the housing. There's one of the T-housing bearings. Here is the T-housing. And you'll see there is a gasket that seals off those threads at the top of the stem. That gasket pulls right off. Now you have your lower bearing and your bevel gear. Just slides right off the machine. Put those down here. Now again, you have the same exact screws holding the stem on. So again, I have to remove them with my medium-sized screwdriver. Okay, so that was the last screw. The stem simply removes from the upper housing. There's a gasket again that seals off the threads. Set my stem to the side. Okay, so now what I have to concentrate on is getting the actual drive motor. The drive gears are down inside, so I'm going to walk through getting this all torn apart. This is where the 3/32 Allen key comes into play. There's 4 screws at the top of the unit. All right, that was the last screw at the top. Set my cap to the side here. So now I have to switch my socket to the 1/4 inch. So that's the smallest one we have for this machine. And then what you want to do is take your flat jaw pliers. You just want to grab the rotor, hang on to it, and just loosen up that acorn nut. There is a tiny little gasket underneath this acorn nut. Again, the design is to seal off the threads. So that little gasket is right there. Set that to the side. Another gasket at the top. Pull that one off. All right, so this is where we're going to switch to our 3/32 Allen key. This will allow us to remove these small little set screws. There's one. There's 2. Now the gear train will just lift right out of the machine by pushing up on the output shaft. So I'm going to remove my upper housing. Again, we have a gasket sealing up off that area. We have the rotor shaft, which I removed from the housing. And now you can lift up the gear train. Comes right out of the machine just like that. And I'll show you, you have your top washer. You have your level of gears, another washer, another level of gears. Put that one back where it belongs. Another level. And then your last 3 gears are right there. We'll talk about them in the part of the video that goes over wear parts. So I'll just leave them right on the shaft. So the last step is I have to remove the final washer that was down inside. And then I just have to remove these last little screws from the bottom. It's the same ones that were at the top. And the bottom will just lift out. There's the housing, lower gasket, and then the cylinder just removes right there. Again, we'll talk about these bushings once we go through the wear parts. So that's an Aseptic 6 completely tore down, and we'll go over wear parts and reassembling it in the next video.